The first wolf should have drowned long before she reached the river. That was the thought that stayed with anyone who later heard the story. The Frostvale River was merciless in winter. It swallowed horses, broke ancient trees from their roots, and carried away hunters who had spent their entire lives learning the mountains. Once the ice cracked beneath someone's feet, there was almost never a second chance. Yet on the coldest night the kingdom had seen in decades, 12 enormous wolves drifted beneath the shattered ice, carried by the black current as though the river itself could not decide whether to claim them or surrender them. One by one, a forgotten healer pulled each frozen body onto the snow. She never noticed that the last wolf carried a faded silver mark hidden beneath layers of frost. Before dawn, whispers were already racing across the mountains. The Alpha King had disappeared. And somewhere beyond the frozen river, an army had begun hunting the woman who had unknowingly changed the fate of an entire kingdom. Winter had ruled the Frostvale Mountains for as long as anyone could remember. Snow covered the highest peaks even during the warmest summers, and the wind carried a voice that seemed older than the kingdom scattered beneath those towering cliffs. Travelers often claimed the mountains were alive. Sometimes they whispered. Sometimes they warned. Sometimes they mourned. Few people listened. The village of Hollowbrook rested in a narrow valley where smoke curled from stone chimneys every evening, disappearing into skies the color of cold iron. Life there was simple, harsh, and measured by the changing seasons rather than by kings or wars. Most people knew one another. They also knew Elowen. She lived alone in a weathered wooden cottage near the edge of the forest where the pine trees grew so thick that daylight struggled to reach the ground. Ivy climbed across the walls of her home during the brief spring months, while bundles of drying herbs hung beneath the roof all year long. The villagers rarely visited unless they needed help. A feverish child. An injured shepherd. A broken arm. A difficult birth. Elowen never asked whether they could pay. Sometimes they left fresh bread. Sometimes dried fish. Sometimes nothing at all. She accepted every gift with the same quiet smile. The older women often shook their heads. Kindness cannot fill an empty pantry. Perhaps they were right. Yet every morning before sunrise, Elowen still walked into the forest carrying the same woven basket her mother had once used. She gathered herbs sleeping beneath the snow, searched for healing moss hidden beneath fallen logs, and rescued injured birds whose wings had frozen against icy branches. Even the wild foxes no longer fled when she approached. Some watched from a distance. Others accepted scraps of food from her hands before disappearing into the trees again. Children loved following her through the village because every walk somehow became an adventure. She knew where rabbits hid after storms. She could imitate nearly every songbird. She remembered the name of every stray dog. To them she seemed almost magical. To the wealthy merchants, she seemed foolish. Compassion, they believed, was wasted on creatures that could never repay it. Elowen never argued. She simply continued living the only way she knew. Years earlier, winter had stolen nearly everything from her. A famine had settled across the mountains after endless snow buried the harvest before it could be gathered. Families rationed what little remained. Her father had spent weeks searching the forests for food. He never returned. Her mother survived only long enough to ensure her daughter learned every healing remedy she possessed before illness claimed her beside the fireplace one silent evening. The cottage had become painfully quiet after that. Some nights the silence felt heavier than the snow pressing against the roof. Still, Elowen refused to abandon the life her parents had built. If you can ease someone's pain, her mother had once whispered while crushing herbs beneath a stone mortar, the mountains remember. As a little girl, Elowen had believed the mountains truly listened. As a woman, she no longer knew. But she remembered the words anyway. The storm arrived before sunset. Clouds rolled over the peaks like waves swallowing the sky, turning the afternoon into early night. The wind howled through the narrow valley, sending frightened chickens racing toward their coops while villagers hurried indoors. Doors slammed shut. Lanterns flickered behind frosted windows. Within minutes, thick snow buried the roads. Elowen tightened the wool cloak around her shoulders and continued down the forest trail with careful steps. Her basket was half full. She needed only one more herb before returning home. Moonroot. It grew beside moving water where the ground stayed damp beneath the snow. She found the pale green leaves near the Frostvale River just as daylight disappeared completely. The icy current rushed beneath thick sheets of frozen glass, carrying broken branches toward the lower valleys. Normally she would have turned home immediately. Instead, she stopped. Something echoed across the river. A splash. Soft. Distant. Almost swallowed by the wind. She waited. Nothing. Only the endless roar of water beneath ice. Perhaps a falling branch. Perhaps a deer. She started walking again. Another splash. This time closer. Elowen frowned. Animals rarely approached the river during storms. Instinct told them better. She stepped off the narrow path and pushed through snow-covered bushes until the frozen river stretched before her. The wind stole her breath. Cracks spread across the ice like enormous spiderwebs. Dark water surged beneath them. Then she saw it. A massive grey shape drifted beneath the surface. At first she thought it was a fallen tree. The current rolled it over. A paw appeared. Then a muzzle. Her heart stopped. A wolf. No. Far larger. Twice the size of any wolf she had ever seen. Its thick silver-grey fur floated around its body like river weeds, while one foreleg remained trapped beneath a broken slab of ice. Another shape emerged behind it. Then another. Then another. 12. 12 enormous wolves were being dragged beneath the frozen current. Some struggled weakly. Others no longer moved at all. Their heavy bodies crashed against jagged ice before disappearing beneath it again. No. The first wolf should have drowned long before she reached the river. That was the thought that stayed with anyone who later heard the story. The Frostvale River was merciless in winter. It swallowed horses, broke ancient trees from their roots, and carried away hunters who had spent their entire lives learning the mountains. Once the ice cracked beneath someone's feet, there was almost never a second chance. Yet on the coldest night the kingdom had seen in decades, 12 enormous wolves drifted beneath the shattered ice, carried by the black current as though the river itself could not decide whether to claim them or surrender them. One by one, a forgotten healer pulled each frozen body onto the snow. She never noticed that the last wolf carried a faded silver mark hidden beneath layers of frost. Before dawn, whispers were already racing across the mountains. The Alpha King had disappeared. And somewhere beyond the frozen river, an army had begun hunting the woman who had unknowingly changed the fate of an entire kingdom. Winter had ruled the Frostvale Mountains for as long as anyone could remember. Snow covered the highest peaks even during the warmest summers, and the wind carried a voice that seemed older than the kingdom scattered beneath those towering cliffs. Travelers often claimed the mountains were alive. Sometimes they whispered. Sometimes they warned. Sometimes they mourned. Few people listened. The village of Hollowbrook rested in a narrow valley where smoke curled from stone chimneys every evening, disappearing into skies the color of cold iron. Life there was simple, harsh, and measured by the changing seasons rather than by kings or wars. Most people knew one another. They also knew Elowen. She lived alone in a weathered wooden cottage near the edge of the forest where the pine trees grew so thick that daylight struggled to reach the ground. Ivy climbed across the walls of her home during the brief spring months, while bundles of drying herbs hung beneath the roof all year long. The villagers rarely visited unless they needed help. A feverish child. An injured shepherd. A broken arm. A difficult birth. Elowen never asked whether they could pay. Sometimes they left fresh bread. Sometimes dried fish. Sometimes nothing at all. She accepted every gift with the same quiet smile. The older women often shook their heads. Kindness cannot fill an empty pantry. Perhaps they were right. Yet every morning before sunrise, Elowen still walked into the forest carrying the same woven basket her mother had once used. She gathered herbs sleeping beneath the snow, searched for healing moss hidden beneath fallen logs, and rescued injured birds whose wings had frozen against icy branches. Even the wild foxes no longer fled when she approached. Some watched from a distance. Others accepted scraps of food from her hands before disappearing into the trees again. Children loved following her through the village because every walk somehow became an adventure. She knew where rabbits hid after storms. She could imitate nearly every songbird. She remembered the name of every stray dog. To them she seemed almost magical. To the wealthy merchants, she seemed foolish. Compassion, they believed, was wasted on creatures that could never repay it. Elowen never argued. She simply continued living the only way she knew. Years earlier, winter had stolen nearly everything from her. A famine had settled across the mountains after endless snow buried the harvest before it could be gathered. Families rationed what little remained. Her father had spent weeks searching the forests for food. He never returned. Her mother survived only long enough to ensure her daughter learned every healing remedy she possessed before illness claimed her beside the fireplace one silent evening. The cottage had become painfully quiet after that. Some nights the silence felt heavier than the snow pressing against the roof. Still, Elowen refused to abandon the life her parents had built. "If you can ease someone's pain," her mother had once whispered while crushing herbs beneath a stone mortar, "the mountains remember." As a little girl, Elowen had believed the mountains truly listened. As a woman, she no longer knew. But she remembered the words anyway. The storm arrived before sunset. Clouds rolled over the peaks like waves swallowing the sky, turning the afternoon into early night. The wind howled through the narrow valley, sending frightened chickens racing toward their coops while villagers hurried indoors. Doors slammed shut. Lanterns flickered behind frosted windows. Within minutes, thick snow buried the roads. Elowen tightened the wool cloak around her shoulders and continued down the forest trail with careful steps. Her basket was half full. She needed only one more herb before returning home. Moonroot. It grew beside moving water where the ground stayed damp beneath the snow. She found the pale green leaves near the Frostvale River just as daylight disappeared completely. The icy current rushed beneath thick sheets of frozen glass, carrying broken branches toward the lower valleys. Normally she would have turned home immediately. Instead, she stopped. Something echoed across the river. A splash. Soft. Distant. Almost swallowed by the wind. She waited. Nothing. Only the endless roar of water beneath ice. Perhaps a falling branch. Perhaps a deer. She started walking again. Another splash. This time closer. Elowen frowned. Animals rarely approached the river during storms. Instinct told them better. She stepped off the narrow path and pushed through snow-covered bushes until the frozen river stretched before her. The wind stole her breath. Cracks spread across the ice like enormous spiderwebs. Dark water surged beneath them. Then she saw it. A massive grey shape drifted beneath the surface. At first she thought it was a fallen tree. The current rolled it over. A paw appeared. Then a muzzle. Her heart stopped. A wolf. No. Far larger. Twice the size of any wolf she had ever seen. Its thick silver-grey fur floated around its body like river weeds, while one foreleg remained trapped beneath a broken slab of ice. Another shape emerged behind it. Then another. Then another. 12. 12 enormous wolves were being dragged beneath the frozen current. Some struggled weakly. Others no longer moved at all. Their heavy bodies crashed against jagged ice before disappearing beneath it again. No! As if it could not understand why such a fragile creature refused to abandon it. She gripped its thick fur once more. "Not tonight," she whispered through chattering teeth. "You won't die tonight." Together they reached the shore. The third wolf collapsed beside the others. 3 enormous bodies now lay scattered across the snowy bank, their silver and charcoal coats slowly disappearing beneath fresh snowfall. The mountain had become strangely quiet. Even the wind seemed to pause. From somewhere deep within the forest came the lonely call of an owl. Then silence. Elowen did not notice the distant shapes watching from between the trees. Red eyes reflected faintly beneath snow-covered branches before disappearing again into darkness. Something had seen what she was doing. Something had been watching since the first rescue. But the storm hid everything. Hour after hour she returned to the river. Each rescue demanded more strength than the one before. The fourth wolf had become wedged between 2 slabs of ice. She hacked at the frozen edges with a fallen branch until her hands bled beneath wool gloves stiffened by frost. The fifth had nearly disappeared beneath the current entirely, forcing her to crawl farther across unstable ice than she ever thought possible. The 6th rescue left her unable to feel her fingers. The 7th blurred together with the 8th until exhaustion erased the difference between one struggle and the next. Her breathing became ragged. Her movements slowed. Several times she fell to her knees in the snow, too weak to stand immediately. Each time she looked toward the village lights. Each time she looked back toward the river. Each time she rose again. The storm offered no mercy. Snow gathered in her hair until she looked almost as white as the wolves she fought to save. Ice clung to her eyelashes. Blood seeped from small cuts across her palms where frozen rope had burned through the skin. Still she refused to stop. By midnight, 9 wolves rested upon the shore. The river had claimed none of them. Yet it had taken nearly everything Elowen had to give. She stumbled toward the 10th wolf, her legs trembling beneath her weight. Halfway there, she simply stopped. Her vision swayed. Darkness crowded the edges of her sight. The cold had settled deep inside her body. She knew the signs. Another few minutes in the water. Another mistake. She might never leave this river herself. A memory drifted quietly into her thoughts. Her father kneeling beside a frightened fawn trapped beneath fallen branches. It had taken hours to free the tiny animal. When neighbors questioned why he wasted precious daylight on a creature that would disappear into the woods forever, he had smiled. The world becomes colder every time kindness loses. At the time, she had been too young to understand. Now those words wrapped around her like the last warm blanket in winter. She took another step. Then another. The 10th wolf emerged from beneath the ice. Its ears twitched weakly. Alive. She smiled despite the tears freezing against her cheeks. "I found you." The rescue lasted longer than all the others combined. By the time she dragged the animal onto the bank, her shoulders burned so fiercely she could barely lift her arms. She collapsed beside it, both of them breathing clouds into the frozen air. The wolf slowly opened one eye. Its gaze settled upon her face. For a long moment neither moved. Then, with what little strength remained, the giant creature lowered its head until its nose gently brushed the sleeve of her coat. Not an attack. Not even curiosity. Gratitude. Before she could react, the wolf closed its eyes once more. Elowen sat perfectly still. The gesture lingered in her heart long after the moment passed. These were not mindless beasts. There was understanding inside those golden eyes. Perhaps even sorrow. She looked toward the river again. Only 2 remained. The storm had eased slightly, but the current had grown faster as broken ice rushed downstream. The 11th wolf had nearly reached the gorge. She ran. Her exhausted legs threatened to give way with every stride. The rope scraped painfully across her shoulders as she hurried along the riverbank, searching desperately for a place where she could reach the drifting animal. She found a narrow bend where the current slowed. Without hesitation she leaped into waist-deep water. The cold stole every breath from her lungs. She nearly cried out. Her fingers wrapped around thick wet fur. The current tried to wrench the wolf away. Instead, Elowen anchored herself against a boulder buried beneath the water. She pulled. The wolf pushed weakly with its remaining strength. Together they reached the snowy bank. 11 lives. Only 1 remained. The last wolf drifted silently beneath the moonlight. Larger than every other. Its fur shimmered silver beneath layers of frost. Unlike the others, it made no attempt to struggle. It floated peacefully, almost as though it had already accepted death. Something about it made Elowen stop. Its presence felt different, ancient. The air itself seemed strangely still around it. Even the wind softened as she approached. When she finally reached its side, her hand brushed against the thick fur covering its forehead. The frost broke away beneath her fingertips. Hidden beneath the ice lay an intricate silver crest unlike anything she had ever seen. The mark glowed faintly beneath the pale moonlight. Lines curved together like vines surrounding a full moon. It pulsed once. Softly. Then faded. Elowen stared in silent wonder. Before she could understand what she had found, a distant horn echoed across the mountains. Once. Twice. Then again. Not a shepherd's horn. Not a hunter calling companions. This was the deep, commanding sound of soldiers searching the wilderness. The last wolf's eyes remained closed. The silver crest shimmered once more beneath the falling snow. And somewhere beyond the dark forest, dozens of torches began moving toward the river. The first rays of morning had not yet reached the Frostvale Mountains when Elowen wrapped both arms around the final wolf and pulled with every ounce of strength left inside her. Her muscles burned. Her soaked clothes clung to her skin like frozen chains. Every breath scraped against her chest. The enormous creature barely moved. It was larger than any of the others by several feet, its broad shoulders buried beneath layers of ice, its silver-grey fur shimmering faintly beneath the moonlight. The strange crest upon its forehead had disappeared beneath fresh frost once again, as though the mountain itself wished to keep it secret. Another blast of the hunting horn echoed through the valley. Closer this time. The sound bounced from cliff to cliff until it seemed to surround her from every direction. She looked toward the forest. Tiny points of orange light flickered between the trees. Torches. Many of them. Someone was searching these mountains long before sunrise. Fear settled quietly inside her, but it never reached her hands. She tightened her grip on the wolf's thick fur. "No," she whispered through clenched teeth. "You've come too far." The river fought her with relentless force. The current tried to drag the great wolf beneath another sheet of broken ice, but Elowen planted both boots against a buried rock and leaned backward until every muscle in her body screamed. The rope dug painfully into her waist. The pine tree behind her bent beneath the strain. For one terrifying moment she believed something would give. The tree. The rope. Or herself. Instead, the wolf shifted. Only an inch. Then another. The current loosened its grip. The giant body slowly slid toward the snowy bank. Elowen stumbled backward, pulling, slipping, falling, then rising again. When at last the wolf collapsed beside the other 11, she simply dropped to her knees. She could not feel her hands. She could barely feel her feet. Snowflakes landed upon her face and melted against skin that had long forgotten warmth. 12 wolves. Every one of them alive. She closed her eyes. A quiet smile touched her lips before exhaustion claimed her completely. For several long moments, neither she nor the wolves moved. Only the river continued its endless song. The cold eventually forced her back to her senses. She opened her eyes to find dawn slowly washing pale blue light across the mountains. The storm had finally passed. The world looked strangely peaceful. As though the night had never happened. Only the 12 giant wolves lying across the snow proved otherwise. Elowen forced herself to stand. The animals could not survive where they were. Their fur remained soaked. Ice clung to their paws. Several still breathed so weakly that she had to kneel beside each one to feel the faint rise and fall beneath thick coats. She glanced toward her small cottage nestled among the pines. It was impossible. There was no room for creatures this large. Yet leaving them here meant certain death. Her eyes settled on an old wooden sled resting beside a nearby woodpile. It had belonged to her father. Years ago, he had used it to carry firewood through the snow. Today, it would carry something far more precious. The work took hours. One by one, she secured each wolf with heavy blankets and ropes before dragging them across the frozen valley. The sled groaned beneath their tremendous weight. Sometimes it refused to move at all. Each journey left deep trails carved into untouched snow. Again and again she returned to the river until every wolf rested beneath the shelter of towering pine trees surrounding her cottage. By the final trip, the sun had climbed above the eastern peaks. Its pale light glittered across the snow like scattered diamonds. Elowen leaned heavily against the cottage door, breathing hard. She had never been so tired. Yet another task remained. Keeping them alive. Her tiny home transformed into a sanctuary before noon. She carried every blanket she owned onto the wooden floor. Old rugs were spread beside the stone fireplace. She stacked log after log until bright flames roared high into the chimney, filling the room with welcome heat and the comforting scent of burning pine. There was space inside for only the smallest 2 wolves. The remaining 10 rested beneath a large wooden shelter attached to the side of the cottage where she stored herbs during summer months. She worked without pause. Warm water. Dry cloth. Fresh bandages. Medicinal salves. Every remedy her parents had ever taught her. She cleaned cuts hidden beneath frozen fur. Removed splinters of broken ice lodged between enormous paws. Applied crushed winter moss to deep wounds she had somehow missed during the darkness. Several injuries puzzled her. These wolves had not simply fallen into the river. Long, narrow cuts crossed their shoulders. Old scars marked their necks. One carried what looked remarkably like an arrow wound. Someone had hunted them. The realization settled uneasily inside her. Who would dare hunt creatures this powerful? Hours passed. The fire crackled softly. Outside, snow slid gently from the roof. The wolves remained silent. No growls. No snapping jaws. No signs of waking. Only slow breathing. Elowen finally allowed herself to sit beside the fireplace. Her hands trembled as she wrapped them around a steaming cup of herbal tea. She stared quietly at the nearest wolf. Its ears twitched, then became still once more. "You frightened me," she murmured with a weary smile. "I've never seen creatures like you." The wolf gave no reply. Yet somehow the silence no longer felt empty. Late that afternoon, she stepped outside to gather more firewood. Fresh tracks stopped her in her path. Huge paw prints. Far larger than any ordinary wolf. She followed them with her eyes. They circled the cottage once. Twice. Then disappeared into the forest. Her heartbeat quickened. She looked toward the shelter. 10 wolves still rested there. The tracks belonged to others. Hidden among the trees. Watching. She slowly lifted her gaze. Between snow-covered branches stood 3 enormous grey wolves. Perfectly still. Their thick winter coats blended almost completely with the landscape. Only their golden eyes gave them away. They did not snarl. They did not advance. They simply watched. One lowered its head ever so slightly. Almost. Respectfully. Then all 3 vanished soundlessly into the forest. Elowen remained frozen where she stood. The woods had swallowed them so completely that she almost wondered whether she had imagined the encounter. Night returned quietly. The mountains settled beneath another blanket of stars. Inside the cottage, the fire burned steadily while warm light danced across rough wooden walls. Elowen checked each wolf once more before finally allowing herself to rest in an old chair beside the hearth. Sleep came almost instantly. She dreamed of rivers glowing silver beneath moonlight. Of wolves running across endless snow without leaving footprints. Of voices she could almost understand but never quite hear. When she awoke sometime before dawn, something felt different. The cottage was no longer silent. Soft breathing echoed nearby. Much stronger now. She sat upright. The 2 wolves inside had moved. One slowly lifted its massive head. Its amber eyes met hers. For several heartbeats neither looked away. Elowen remained perfectly still. Every warning she had ever heard about wolves rushed back into her thoughts. Yet the great animal made no threatening movement. Instead, it carefully struggled onto unsteady legs. It looked toward the open door. Then back at her. Almost as though asking permission. With a gentle nod, she rose and pulled the door open. Cold morning air drifted inside. The wolf stepped past her without haste. Outside, the remaining wolves had begun to stir. One after another, they rose from the snow. Their movements were slow but steady. Elowen watched in amazement as the first wolf disappeared into the trees. Then another. Then another. Each paused only briefly. Each turned toward her one final time before vanishing into the forest. Within minutes, 11 wolves were gone. Only deep paw prints remained in the fresh snow. Elowen smiled softly. "They're safe." She expected the last wolf to follow. It did not. The giant creature with the silver crest still lay beside the fire exactly where she had left it. Its breathing had become stronger. Its wounds had begun to close. But its eyes remained shut. She knelt beside it. The silver marking upon its forehead shimmered faintly in the morning light before fading once again beneath thick fur. "What are you?" she whispered. A sudden pounding echoed outside. Not one knock. Many. Heavy boots crunched through snow. Men shouted sharp orders. Metal armor clinked together. Elowen hurried to the window. A line of mounted soldiers rode into the clearing, their dark cloaks snapping in the cold wind. At their head flew a crimson banner bearing the black wolf's head crest of Lord Garrick, ruler of the northern fortress. The riders spread across the clearing with practiced precision. Some examined the enormous paw prints surrounding her cottage. Others searched the nearby forest. Then their captain looked directly toward her front door. His expression hardened. He had seen the tracks leading inside. Elowen instinctively stepped backward. Behind her, the great silver wolf remained motionless. For one unbearable moment, the entire cottage fell silent. Then, a slow breath filled the room. The giant wolf's chest rose for the first time since the river. Its ears twitched. Its claws flexed gently against the wooden floor. And at last, its brilliant golden eyes opened. For a single heartbeat, the world seemed to stop. The pounding at the cottage door faded beneath the sound of Elowen's own breathing. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, sending warm light dancing across the wooden walls, but her attention never left the pair of golden eyes now fixed upon her. They were unlike any eyes she had ever seen. Not simply bright. Ancient. Deep as moonlit lakes, carrying centuries of sorrow, wisdom, and quiet strength. The giant wolf did not move. It simply watched her. Not with the hungry stare of a predator. Not with the fearful glance of an injured animal. There was recognition in its gaze. As though it already knew her. Another heavy knock rattled the cottage door. Open in the name of Lord Garrick. The command echoed through the little house. Elowen flinched. The wolf did not. Its ears tilted toward the sound before returning to her. She slowly raised both hands, keeping them where the animal could see them. "I won't hurt you," she whispered. The great wolf blinked once. Its breathing remained slow and steady. Then, with visible effort, it pushed itself onto its forelegs. Pain rippled through its massive body. One hind leg buckled beneath its weight, forcing it back against the floor. A quiet rumble escaped its chest. Not a growl. More like frustration. It hated appearing weak. Outside, the soldiers struck the door again. Open immediately. The wooden frame groaned beneath the blows. Elowen looked from the door to the wounded wolf. If the soldiers entered, they would kill it without hesitation. She did not know why she believed that. She simply did. Her eyes darted around the room until they settled on a heavy wool curtain hanging across the entrance to the herb cellar beneath the cottage. It was small, dark, hidden behind stacked barrels. She hurried toward the wolf. "You have to trust me." The words escaped before she realized how foolish they sounded. Trust me. She was speaking to a creature larger than a horse. The wolf held her gaze for another long moment. Then something remarkable happened. Without resistance, without hesitation, it slowly dragged itself toward the hidden cellar. Elowen stared in astonishment. The animal understood. Not every word. Perhaps not even most of them. But somehow, it understood enough. She pulled the curtain aside. The narrow cellar smelled of dried lavender, cedar roots, and bundles of winter herbs hanging from the ceiling. The wolf disappeared into the shadows just as another violent blow shook the front door. Elowen let the curtain fall back into place. She scattered several baskets in front of it, disguising the entrance as naturally as she could. Then she drew one slow breath before opening the door. 6 armored soldiers stood outside. Snow covered their cloaks. Ice clung to their beards. Each carried a long spear with a silver blade that caught the pale morning light. Behind them waited another dozen riders mounted upon enormous black horses. At their center sat a broad-shouldered man wearing polished steel trimmed with crimson fur. A scar crossed one side of his face from temple to jaw. His eyes were cold enough to rival the winter itself. Captain Darius. Lord Garrick's most feared hunter. His horse stepped closer. "We're searching for a wounded beast." Elowen kept her voice calm. "I've seen many wounded creatures." His expression never changed. Not this one. He reached into a leather satchel and unfolded a piece of rough parchment. Upon it was a charcoal sketch. Not perfect, but unmistakable. A giant wolf. A silver crest upon its forehead. Her heart skipped. She forced herself not to look toward the cellar. "I've never seen an animal like that." The captain watched her silently. The wind whistled between the pines. Snow drifted lazily across the clearing. No one spoke. Then his eyes lowered. To the ground. Fresh paw prints. Hundreds of them surrounded the cottage. His gaze slowly rose again. Interesting. Elowen felt every muscle tighten. You live alone. I do. And these tracks? Wolves often pass through the forest. Not like these. He dismounted. Each step across the snow sounded strangely loud. Crunch. 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 He stopped only a few feet away. You've been very busy. Elowen remained still. I gather herbs. His eyes shifted toward the sled resting beside the woodshed. Long grooves stretched from the frozen river all the way to the cottage. The captain followed them with unsettling patience. His voice became quieter. May we come inside? Every instinct warned her to refuse. Doing so would only make them suspicious. She stepped aside. Of course. The soldiers entered cautiously. Boots thudded against the wooden floor. Their armor filled the small cottage with the scent of cold iron and wet leather. One man examined the fireplace. Another peered beneath the table. A third searched the sleeping loft. Captain Darius walked slowly around the room, noticing everything. The drying herbs. The jars lining the shelves. Fresh bandages. Bloody cloth folded neatly beside a basin of melted snow. He lifted one stained strip of linen. Were you injured? Elowen answered truthfully. No. Then whose blood is this? She met his gaze. Animals. What kind? She hesitated for the smallest fraction of a second. Too small for most people to notice. Not for him. He smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. You have a kind heart. I try. Kind hearts often make dangerous choices. Silence settled between them. One of the younger soldiers approached. Captain. He held up a thick strand of silver-grey fur caught upon a wooden nail near the doorway. The room became perfectly still. Darius accepted it. His fingers rolled the coarse fur thoughtfully. So. His voice remained almost gentle. It seems our wounded beast truly was here. Elowen's heartbeat thundered inside her chest. She said nothing. Outside, ravens called from the treetops. The captain stepped closer. I'll ask only once. Where is it? She looked directly into his eyes. I don't know. For several seconds he searched her face. Looking for fear. Looking for doubt. Looking for any crack in her resolve. He found none. At last he laughed quietly. I believe you. Relief nearly reached her before he continued. I also believe you're protecting something. Without warning he turned toward his men. Search everything. Barrels crashed aside. Shelves emptied. Blankets were thrown across the room. One soldier moved toward the herb cellar. Elowen instinctively stepped into his path. Please. The word escaped before she could stop it. There are fragile medicines stored there. The captain noticed. His eyes narrowed. So that's the place. He walked slowly toward the curtain. Every step tightened the knot in Elowen's stomach. Behind the cloth. The wounded wolf waited. Injured. Unable to escape. She knew exactly what would happen if the curtain opened. Captain Darius reached for the fabric. Before his hand touched it, a horn echoed from somewhere deep within the forest. Short. Sharp. Urgent. Every soldier froze. Another horn answered from farther away. Then another. A rider burst into the clearing outside, his horse lathered with sweat despite the freezing air. Captain. The young messenger barely caught his breath. We found them. Darius turned sharply. The wolves. Not wolves. The Western Patrol. They're dead. Confusion crossed even the captain's hardened face. Dead. The messenger nodded. Every one of them. His voice dropped to a whisper. It looks like something hunted the hunters. The cottage fell silent. Even the soldiers exchanged uneasy glances. No one spoke. Slowly, very slowly, Captain Darius lowered his hand from the cellar curtain. He looked once more at Elowen. You've been fortunate today. He folded the strand of silver fur into his pouch. But fortune has a way of changing. With a sharp motion, he signaled his men. They left as quickly as they had arrived. Hooves thundered across the clearing. Within moments, only silence remained. Elowen stood motionless until the last sound disappeared into the mountains. Only then did her knees weaken. She leaned heavily against the wall. The danger had passed. For now. Several minutes later, she pulled the curtain aside. The cellar was empty. She blinked in confusion. Then she heard it. A slow movement behind her. She turned. The great silver wolf stood beside the fireplace. She had neither seen nor heard it emerge. Its wounds should have made standing nearly impossible. Yet there it was. Proud. Silent. Watching her. Sunlight spilled through the window and rested upon the silver crest between its eyes. This time the mark did not fade. Instead, it glowed softly like moonlight reflected upon fresh snow. The wolf lowered its great head. Not in weakness. In respect. Elowen hesitated before lifting one trembling hand. Its warm fur brushed against her fingers. For an instant, the room disappeared. A strange warmth spread through her hand, traveling gently up her arm. Images flashed across her mind like reflections upon water. A towering stone fortress hidden among snowy cliffs. Hundreds of giant wolves running beneath a full moon. An ancient throne carved from white crystal. A crown shaped like intertwining branches of silver. Then, a battlefield. Fire. Blood staining the snow. A man in black armor raising a sword toward the silver-crowned wolf. The vision shattered. Elowen gasped and stumbled backward. The wolf remained perfectly still. Its golden eyes held a sadness deeper than words. Outside, far beyond the peaceful clearing, the horns of Lord Garrick's army echoed once again across the mountains. This time they were not searching blindly. They knew the Alpha King was alive. And somewhere within the endless forests of Frostvale, 11 giant wolves had already begun running home. Elowen stood motionless long after the vision faded. The warmth that had rushed through her hand slowly disappeared, replaced by the familiar crackle of the fireplace and the soft whisper of wind against the cottage walls. Yet nothing around her felt familiar anymore. Her heart still raced. The towering fortress. The crystal throne. The wolves racing beneath a silver moon. The battlefield drenched in snow and blood. None of it could have been imagined. The memories had felt too real. She looked at the great wolf standing before her. "You showed me those things." Her voice was barely louder than the fire. The wolf blinked slowly. Its golden eyes never left hers. It did not answer, yet the silence carried its own meaning. Elowen had spent her entire life believing the old mountain legends were only stories meant to comfort children through long winters. Now she wasn't so sure. The great wolf turned toward the open window. Its ears lifted. The muscles beneath its thick coat tensed. It had heard something. Elowen listened. At first, nothing. Then, very faintly, a long howl drifted across the mountains. It was unlike the cries of ordinary wolves. This sound was deeper, older. It carried through the forest like a song remembered by the trees themselves. The silver wolf answered. Its voice rolled across the valley with quiet power, filling the frozen air without aggression or fear. One howl. Only one. Yet the mountains answered. Another call echoed from the eastern cliffs. Then another from somewhere beyond the frozen river. A third rose from deep within the northern forest. One by one, more voices joined, until the entire valley seemed alive with wolves calling to one another across impossible distances. Elowen stepped outside. Snowflakes drifted lazily beneath a pale afternoon sky. The wind had calmed. Even the birds had fallen silent. She watched the forest. Nothing moved. Only the echoes remained. Then, one after another, enormous grey shapes emerged between the pines. Not 2. Not 5. Dozens. Each wolf was immense. Some carried scars across their shoulders. Others limped slightly as they crossed the snow. Several wore collars woven from leather and silver thread unlike anything crafted by human hands. None approached aggressively. Instead, every wolf stopped several yards from the cottage. The clearing fell completely silent. Then every one of them lowered its head. Not toward Elowen. toward the silver wolf standing beside her. A quiet shiver passed through her. Whatever this creature truly was, these wolves served it. The great silver wolf took one slow step forward. The others remained perfectly still. It looked across them with calm authority. No growl. No bark. Only a steady gaze. The wolves responded as though commands had been spoken aloud. Half moved into the surrounding forest, forming a wide protective circle around the cottage. The remaining wolves settled into the snow, watching every direction at once. Elowen had never witnessed such discipline among wild animals. This was no ordinary pack. It felt like an army. As daylight faded, one wolf separated itself from the others. Its muzzle had turned almost white with age. Deep scars crossed its face, and one ear had been torn nearly in half. Despite its injuries, it carried itself with quiet dignity. It approached slowly. When it reached the silver wolf, it lowered itself completely onto the snow. Not out of fear. Out of respect. The silver wolf gently touched its nose against the elder's forehead. For a brief moment, neither moved. Then the old wolf turned toward Elowen. Its amber eyes softened. Slowly, carefully, it lowered its head before her as well. Elowen instinctively took a step back. The gesture startled her more than any growl could have. "I don't understand," she whispered. The elder wolf lifted its gaze. Something glimmered around its neck. A small leather pouch. The old wolf nudged it gently toward her. She hesitated only a moment before kneeling. Inside the pouch rested a beautifully carved pendant. It had been shaped from pale white stone polished smooth by countless years. Upon its surface appeared the same silver crest she had seen upon the great wolf's forehead. As soon as her fingers touched it, warmth spread through the stone. Tiny lines of silver light shimmered briefly before fading. The elder wolf watched quietly. It was offering her something. A gift. Or perhaps, a trust. She slipped the pendant carefully around her neck. The old wolf closed its eyes. Its tail brushed gently across the snow. Behind it, dozens of wolves relaxed almost at once. The tension surrounding the clearing quietly disappeared. It was as though they had been waiting for that single moment. Night settled over the mountains. A great fire burned outside the cottage while Elowen prepared what little food she had. Stew simmered inside a black iron pot. Fresh bread warmed beside the flames. She laughed softly at herself. "What am I doing?" She had spent years cooking for lonely travelers and hungry children. Now she found herself wondering whether giant wolves preferred rabbit or venison. The answer came quickly. Neither. The elder wolf disappeared briefly into the forest before returning with a freshly caught stag. It placed the animal near the edge of the clearing before stepping away. The others waited. None touched it. Only after the silver wolf approached did the pack begin eating. Even then, there was no fighting. No snarling. The youngest wolves ate first. Then the injured. Only after everyone else had finished did the strongest feed. Elowen watched in amazement. It reminded her less of wild animals, and more of a family. The following morning brought an unexpected visitor. A young shepherd named Rowan arrived carrying a basket of fresh eggs. He often stopped by to trade food for healing herbs. Today his cheerful smile disappeared the instant he saw the enormous paw prints surrounding the cottage. "Elowen." His voice dropped to a whisper. "What happened here?" She quickly stepped outside before he could see the wolves hidden among the trees. "Nothing you need to worry about." His eyes widened. "Those tracks are bigger than my sheep." She smiled gently. "They belong to travelers." Rowan stared at her. Travelers with paws. For the first time in days, Elowen laughed. A genuine laugh. It lasted only a moment. Then Rowan's expression grew serious. "I came because people are talking." Her smile faded. "What are they saying?" "Lord Garrick's soldiers returned to the village this morning." Her stomach tightened. "They're offering gold." "For what?" "For information." He swallowed nervously. "They say anyone helping a giant silver wolf will be executed for treason." The clearing suddenly felt much colder. Rowan shifted uneasily. "They questioned everyone." What did you tell them? The truth. She looked at him carefully. I said you spend your days healing birds, rabbits, and stubborn old shepherds. A faint smile crossed his face. I couldn't imagine you hiding monsters. Elowen looked toward the forest. Neither could she. Until now. After Rowan left, the elder wolf approached once more. It looked toward the northern mountains. Its ears flattened. The silver wolf joined it. Both stood perfectly still. Watching. Listening. Elowen followed their gaze. At first she saw only endless snow-covered peaks. Then, tiny black dots. Far away. Moving. More appeared behind them. Then dozens more. Even from such a distance, sunlight flashed against polished armor. An army. She felt the color drain from her face. They're coming. The elder wolf released a low rumble. Not fear. Warning. The silver wolf turned toward Elowen. Its golden eyes searched hers with quiet urgency. Then it began walking toward the forest. After several steps it stopped. Looked back. Waited. The meaning was unmistakable. It wanted her to follow. She glanced once toward her little cottage. The herb garden buried beneath snow. The worn wooden porch her father had built. The chimney her mother had repaired with her own hands. Everything she had ever called home stood peacefully behind her. If she left now, nothing would ever be the same again. The wind stirred gently through the pine branches. Snow drifted from the rooftops. Elowen stepped onto the porch one last time and rested her hand against the weathered wooden door. So this is goodbye. Her voice trembled. She did not cry. Instead, she picked up her father's old satchel, filled it with healing herbs, dried food, clean bandages, and the small wooden carving of a mountain bird that her mother had made when she was a child. Nothing more. The cottage had given her everything it could. Now another path waited. She closed the door without locking it. Somehow, she knew locks no longer mattered. When she turned around, the wolves had already formed a protective circle around the clearing. The silver wolf stood at the front. Sunlight touched the silver crest upon its forehead, making it shine like the first star appearing before nightfall. Elowen drew one slow breath. Then she took her first step into the ancient forest. Behind her, Hollowbrook disappeared beneath falling snow. Ahead lay forgotten trails untouched by human feet for generations. Hidden beyond those endless trees waited a kingdom no ordinary person had seen for centuries. And somewhere deep within that secret world, the truth about the wounded wolf, the moonbound guardians, and the Alpha King was finally waiting to be revealed. The forest welcomed them without a sound. As soon as Elowen stepped beneath the towering pines, the noise of the outside world seemed to vanish. The cold wind that had chased her across the open valley softened into a gentle whisper weaving through evergreen branches. Thick snow rested upon the limbs of ancient trees, but none of it fell, as though the forest itself had become perfectly still to watch the strange procession passing beneath its canopy. The silver wolf led the way. Two enormous guardians walked several paces ahead, scanning every shadow. Others moved through the trees without making a sound, appearing and disappearing between the trunks like drifting spirits. Elowen remained near the center of the pack. Not because anyone ordered her to. Because every wolf quietly adjusted its path until she was protected from every direction. She noticed it after the first mile. Whenever the trail narrowed beside a cliff, two wolves walked closer. Whenever strange sounds echoed through the woods, another guardian silently appeared beside her. No one spoke. No command was given. Yet every movement carried purpose. It felt less like traveling with wild animals, and more like walking beside loyal soldiers. The trail climbed steadily into the northern mountains. Soon the familiar paths used by hunters disappeared beneath untouched snow. Towering cliffs rose on either side. Ancient stone pillars, half buried beneath ice, appeared among the trees. Each pillar bore carvings of wolves running beneath a full moon. Some had weathered so badly that only faint outlines remained. Others looked almost untouched despite countless winters. Elowen paused beside one of them. Her gloved fingers brushed away a layer of snow. The carving beneath shimmered faintly. A woman stood among a circle of wolves, one hand resting upon the head of the largest. Above them floated a silver moon. She frowned. The woman looked human. The old wolf noticed her curiosity. It approached quietly before pressing its nose against the ancient stone. The faint silver glow spread through the carving for only a heartbeat. Then it disappeared, almost as though the monument had recognized one of its own. Elowen looked toward the elder. "What is this place?" The wolf simply continued walking. The answer lay farther ahead. By midday they reached a frozen waterfall stretching nearly 200 feet down the face of a granite cliff. The water had become crystal blue ice, sparkling beneath the afternoon sun like polished glass. The wolves stopped. The silver wolf stepped toward the frozen wall. It lowered its head. The silver crest upon its forehead began glowing once more. At first the light was soft, then brighter. Thin lines of silver spread across the frozen waterfall like roots beneath clear water. A deep rumble echoed through the mountain. Elowen instinctively stepped backward. The ice moved, not melting, opening. The frozen waterfall slowly separated down the center, revealing a hidden passage large enough for dozens of wolves to walk through side by side. Warm air drifted from within. It carried the scent of cedar, fresh water, wildflowers, and something else. Home. The wolves entered without hesitation. Elowen stood frozen. No story told in Hollowbrook had ever mentioned such a place. The silver wolf looked back. Its golden eyes met hers. There was quiet encouragement within them. She nodded to herself, then crossed the threshold. The frozen wall closed silently behind them. Everything changed. Winter disappeared almost instantly. Not completely. Snow still rested upon distant cliffs high above. But within the hidden valley beyond the mountain, spring had somehow survived. A broad river wound peacefully through emerald fields untouched by frost. Ancient oak trees spread their enormous branches across rolling hills where hundreds of deer grazed without fear. Bright wildflowers covered the ground in every direction. Birdsong filled the warm afternoon air. Crystal streams tumbled over smooth stones before joining the larger river below. Elowen stopped walking. She simply stared. It felt impossible, as though she had stepped into another world. Farther ahead, enormous white structures rose among the hills. Not castles built by men. These buildings blended into the landscape itself. Stone towers curved like ancient trees. Bridges stretched naturally between cliffs. Gardens climbed terraces overflowing with flowers even in the heart of winter. Moonlight-colored banners drifted gently from high walls despite the still air. The hidden kingdom had been waiting beyond the mountain all along. Hidden from the world. Protected for centuries. Movement spread across the valley. Wolves emerged from every direction. Young pups tumbled playfully across the grass before stopping in surprise. Mothers gently gathered them close. Hunters returning from distant patrols froze where they stood. Within moments, hundreds of giant wolves had gathered. Silence settled over the valley. Every gaze fixed upon the silver wolf. The great creature continued walking with slow dignity. Its wounds were still healing. Its steps remained careful. Yet nothing could diminish the quiet authority surrounding it. One by one, every wolf lowered its head. The entire valley bowed. No command. No hesitation. Only complete loyalty. Elowen felt her breath catch. She finally understood. This was no respected guardian. No elder. No commander. This was their king. The Alpha King. A deep horn echoed from the highest tower. Its rich note rolled across the valley like distant thunder. From the grand staircase ahead descended 3 elderly figures wearing long grey cloaks trimmed with white fur. Unlike the villagers of Hollowbrook, these people carried themselves with calm confidence beside the wolves. None showed fear. The oldest among them leaned heavily upon an ashwood staff carved with silver moons. His white beard reached nearly to his waist. His eyes filled with tears the moment he saw the silver wolf. Without speaking, he slowly knelt. The other 2 elders followed immediately. Soon every person gathered within the valley had done the same. Only Elowen remained standing. Not because she wished to disrespect anyone. She simply did not understand. The silver wolf approached the old man. The elder gently rested one trembling hand upon its head. "My king." His voice broke with emotion. "We feared the river had claimed you." The wolf lowered its head slightly. The old man's eyes shifted toward Elowen. For several long moments he simply looked at her. Wonder slowly replaced surprise. Then disbelief. Finally, recognition. He rose slowly despite his age. "You." His voice became barely a whisper. "The gentle heart." Elowen blinked. "I think you've mistaken me for someone else." The elder smiled softly. "No. We have waited many generations for someone exactly like you." Before she could answer, another figure hurried down the stone steps. She was a young woman dressed in deep blue robes, carrying a satchel filled with herbs almost identical to Elowen's own. Dark curls framed a kind face, though exhaustion rested beneath her eyes. She stopped suddenly upon seeing the Alpha King alive. Tears rolled freely down her cheeks. "My king." She hurried forward before respectfully kneeling. Only after several moments did she notice Elowen. "You treated his wounds." "It wasn't a question." Elowen nodded. "I tried." The healer smiled through tears. "No." She looked toward the gathered wolves. "You did far more than that." She placed one hand over her heart. "My name is Lyra. I have served the royal healers since I was a child." Her eyes filled with admiration. "I've never known anyone who could bring him back from death." Elowen shook her head. "I only did what anyone should do." The elder quietly smiled. "That," he said, "is exactly why the prophecy chose you." Before Elowen could ask another question, a distant howl shattered the peaceful silence. One of the border guards raced across the valley. Its breathing came hard. Its fur was streaked with fresh blood. It skidded to a stop before the Alpha King. The messenger lowered itself immediately. A tense silence spread through everyone gathered. The elder's expression darkened. "What is it?" Though the wolf could not speak with human words, every movement carried unmistakable urgency. The Alpha King's golden eyes narrowed. The old elder slowly turned toward Elowen. His voice was grave. "Lord Garrick has found the hidden passes." Another horn sounded. This one from the eastern watchtower. Then another. Then another. Across the peaceful valley, bells began ringing. Children were hurried indoors. Warriors raced toward the walls. The calm kingdom transformed in moments. Far beyond the mountain, black banners were already climbing the snowy ridges. Lord Garrick had not merely followed them. He had come with an army. And the first battle for the hidden kingdom was about to begin.